Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. Today I'm going to be doing some French country thrift flips. For my first project, I'm going to be working on this little wooden panel that I thrifted for just $1. Someone had already painted it, but I'm going to begin by adding Paint Couture's Pitch Black chalk paint. Now, if I was going to be doing a flat finish, I would definitely have gone in and sanded this piece first because there is texture that is associated with those flowers. There's raised paint details, it's uneven, but I'm going to be doing a textured look today. I want the black to show through the texture product that I'm going to be using, so that's why we're going with black, and I'm doing one coat. When my paint was dry, I took out Pentart's Cracking Paste Primer. I'm going to stir it really well. The instructions on the label said that that was a good idea, so I'm going to stir it well, and then I'm going to go in and place down one even coat. I'm trying to not go back over the top of the areas that I've already got the primer too much. Just making sure that I've got really good coverage. I'm also going to be painting over the top of the sides as well. Once I had finished applying the primer over the top of the surface, I did take out my hairdryer and I sped up that drying process. What you're looking for here is a clear finish. That's when you know that it's ready to go. And then I took out Pentart's cracking paste. I'm going to be applying the cracking paste with a variety of tools. I'm actually just using an IOD transfer stick here to get some of that out. And then I'm using the IOD paint blade to actually spread that paste. It is quite thick. I'm also using a bit of a lighter hand, and I'm sort of angling the paint blade at a bit of a closer angle because I don't want to create grooves. I want a bit more of a smooth, almost plaster-like finish. I don't mind if I get some texture. We are going for a textured surface, so some differences in levels and also some of the black peeking through. That is fine by me. I'm also going to bring that paste down to the edges of our little panel there. The beauty of this cracking paste is that it is very thick, so it is covering up the sunflower painted details that I put the black over the top of. I'm not worried about seeing any of that peeking through, and while I may have some people say that they could probably just use PVA glue under some paint, this stuff is so thick and it cracks just so beautifully. I definitely think this is a really fun product that I'll be using again. Once I finished applying the cracking paste, I did take out my hairdryer again, and you will see here I'm speeding up the drying process, and you can literally see the cracks appearing as I am drying it off. It was really fun to do this step. Let me know in the comments if you have tried Pentart's cracking paste. When that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Simply White chalk paint, and I have already mixed it with some salt wash texture additive, and here I'm just getting it out and I'm going to scrape it over the top of some of the cracks. You can see we've got some absolutely stunning cracks here, but I am going to be putting a paint inlay in the center, and I want to make sure that you can still see the image. So I'm going over the top of some of the areas with the Crackle so that we have a bit more of like an uninterrupted image, so that the eye doesn't get too overwhelmed with all of the cracks. So I'm just applying it with a little spatula. I'm then using my paint blade to scrape that and spread that, and I'm also using a wet wipe in some areas as well. This is a step that you definitely don't have to do if you are happy to have all of those crackles in the background. But as I said, I just wanted sort of a plainer background for my paint inlay to go on and have all those crackles going around the edges. You'll still be able to see the crackle texture in the background a little bit, but I've just toned it down. I then took out IOD's new Florography paint inlay. I'm going to be cutting out this smaller floral design here. I'm also going to be trimming off the text there. I want to rearrange it. I'm trimming off some of the smaller text down the bottom to save for later, and I also cut off some of the border pieces as well. I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin with my paint inlay today. I'm going to lay down a generous coat so that there's a lot of product for the paint inlay to sit in, so quite generous with that. You could definitely use paint for this step, but I still want to be able to see the crackles that I already have in the background of my paint inlay. So I've got a nice generous coat on there. I'm then going to add my paint inlay design side down. That grid should be facing up at you. I'm then going to begin to gently push the paint inlay into my clear coat. I'm using a mister, and then I'm using a wet wipe to smooth out the paint inlay. It's also going to spread that moisture as well. I did reposition it a little bit to start off with. So I'm just making sure I've got really good contact and we don't have any air bubbles and that I've got that nice and damp. And then I used my hairdryer to speed up the drying process. Here you can see that my paint inlay is completely dry. It's become opaque again. I'm using my mister to dampen it. I gave it about 60 seconds for that moisture to soak in, and then I started pulling the inlay back. This was very satisfying. I was really pleased with how the paint inlay turned out, and I'm already loving the look of the cracks behind it. I'm going to set that off to the side, and then I'm going to add a little bit more of that clear coat, being careful not to go over the top of my paint inlay there. And then I'm going to press that text that we trimmed off earlier into the wet clear coat, and then I'm adding a little bit of moisture and using the wet wipe to press that down. I dried that off and then repeated the same process. I'm going to use my mister to dampen the paint inlay, and then after about 60 seconds of letting that soak in, I gently peeled it away. I dried my paint inlay well with a hairdryer, and then I used Paint Couture's Extreme Garden Satin again to seal it. As I was doing this, I did get a few little smears here and there. I'm using a light hand and a generous amount of product. I'm trying not to go over the area too many times. If you are worried about any smudging, I would suggest that you use a spray sealer. I'm also going around the edges of the project. Now, as I was doing it, as I said, I got a few smudges and I actually liked the effect. So before it was dry, I went back in with my brush, and I am actually forcing those smudges. I really quite liked how, as the clear coat was reactivating the paint inlay, it looked a little bit more like a sepia tone. It just really appealed to me. I loved the look. Obviously this is an optional step, but I think it definitely gave it a bit more of a vintage look to it, and I definitely like this effect. I also started spreading some of the smudged paint inlay sort of sepia tone into the background, and then I let that dry. I then took out Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic, and I'm going to be using this just on the edges of the project. I wanted to frame it out a bit more and to bring in a little bit of a metallic, a little bit of shine. So I'm going to go around the edges, and I'm going to be applying 2 coats. And something that I really liked about this is that when the metallic was drying, I could see those beautiful cracks showing through, that black that we had underneath peeking through, and I think it was just a really lovely effect. Definitely you could leave this step out of adding the bronze, but I like to add a little bit of shine, and I think it frames it out quite nicely. When my 2 coats of bronze were dry, I took out Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Antiquing Glaze. I'm just going to be adding a little bit, and particularly having it focused on the outside to create a little bit of a halo look. And you will notice that adding the glaze went down a little bit into some of the cracks that were hidden a bit by the Simply White that we added. So we're still able to see those cracks, but they're a bit more subdued and in the background, so that the floral design is still the main focus. And I really like the look of this. I also went over the edges with the glaze as well. I'm going to be sitting this on a shelf, but you could definitely add a hanger to the back if you wanted it for wall art. And here's a look at our finished floral plaque. I love how this turned out. I am obsessed with that Crackle paste now, and it goes perfectly with the Floriography paint inlay. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my second project, I'm going to be working on this little, I believe it's a napkin holder. I picked it up for just $1. I think it could also be used as a letter holder. I'm going to be using some paper towel and some wet wipes to give it a good clean. It was just a little bit dusty, especially in those tight little sections there. I'm then going to be taking out the Enlightened Etchings mold by Redesign and Paint Couture's Rapid Casting Resin. I'm going to be pouring out equal parts step 1 and step 2. I'm combining those in a silicone cup. I find the silicone cups really good because it's easy to clean out. So I'm just pouring out the equal part for step 2, and then I'm going to stir it really well for about 30 seconds. I'm going to be using resin as opposed to clay because I want that top piece to sit above the napkin holder, so I need it to have the strength and stability. Once I've stirred it well enough, I'm going to pour the resin into the different sections of the mold. And then in about 10 to 12 minutes, this is going to turn opaque white and it's going to be ready to be used. Once my resin was finished curing, I took it out of the molds there. I'm just flexing the sides to help it release. Now, this has been in the molds for about 10 minutes, so it's still going to be a little bit flexible. I like to take it out at this time in case I need to manipulate it a little bit further. I'm going to be putting this one on the back section, and this beautiful trim piece here I'm going to have on the front. Now, I probably could have done that one in clay, but I already had the resin out, so I just went with it. I'm going to be using Gorilla Super Glue Gel on the bottom half of the ornate sort of scroll detail there. It's going to go up the top on the back, and as I said, I'm going to have a little bit of it sticking up the top, so the resin is perfect for this. I'm not going to be worried about it breaking off. It's going to be nice and sturdy. So I'm just going to press that down until I'm happy with it and I know that it's stuck in place, and then I'm going to add some super glue to the back of the trim piece, and that piece is going to be positioned down the bottom. Once I have my castings in position, I did use a wet wipe to remove any of the excess glue from around the edges of the resin pieces. When the glue was dry, I decided to take it outside and use some of White Knight's white spray paint. I'm using this as a primer. Primer is definitely a must on this surface. It's a glossy surface, but I didn't want to be struggling to get the primer in those middle sections. I thought it was just easier if I used the spray. That means I'd be fighting with it a little bit less. Here you can see this is how it's turned out. It's all nice and dry. I am obviously not going to be leaving it like this. I'm going to take out Paint Couture's Buttercream Chalk Paint and I'm going to be combining it with Salt Wash Texture Additive. So I'm just going to put a little bit into my buttercream there. I'm going to stir it really well. So this is going to give us the texture. It's going to look less like a laminate piece. I'm using a chip brush to apply my buttercream salt wash mixture there, and I'm applying it in a dabbing and stippling motion. As I mentioned previously, this is a glossy laminate surface, so it definitely needed primer. Usually I would use Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer, but the gaps in between the different sections of this piece are very narrow and it's already going to be a bit tricky to get the other paint layers in there. So I thought spray painting it definitely saved me a bit of drama, definitely made things a little bit quicker. You could use spray paint over the entire project if you're going to give this sort of a project a try, and you don't have to add paint like I am, but I really love texture. I wanted this to look a bit more old world, and adding the salt wash with the paint definitely helps to achieve that and to disguise the fact that it's a laminate piece. So as you can see, I am continuing to apply the salt wash mixture. I'm going to be applying it down in those gaps as well. And I definitely recommend when you're using salt wash that you use a chip brush. It can be very hard on the bristles of your brush. I ended up doing 2 coats of this, and because we already had that white spray paint down, that was definitely all that it needed. Before the second coat of the salt wash mixture was dry, I went in with my chip brush, and you can see I'm brushing down some of those peaks. I do have a little bit of the product on my brush, but you can see I'm just sort of smoothing out the texture a little bit. This is going to soften those peaks and just add to that overall old world feel. Once my paint was dry, I took out this French style stencil that I had in my stash. I'm going to tape it in place, and then I'm using some of Paint Couture's Embossing Medium on a palette knife. I'm going over the top of this French writing here. Because I'm thinking this is probably going to be a napkin holder, I thought that this was suitable because it says something along the lines of cakes and pastries. So I thought that fit quite nicely, and the embossing medium is going to make that text stand out nicely. So once I have gone over the top of that, I'm going to gently remove the stencil. I tidied up a little bit of it with a wet wipe, and then I let it dry completely. I then took out Fusion's Almond Latte Milk Paint. I'm going to be measuring out about half a cupful of that into a plastic cup, and then I'm going to be using the same amount of water, actually a little bit more than that. I wanted this to be a little bit more of a wash. We don't want to completely cover what I've already got down there, but I do want to add a bit more age and dimension. So I'm going to go in with that milk paint now. I am going over the top of everything with this, but I am using a mister and a wet wipe here and there to pull some of it back, particularly from the high points. On the sections without molds, I'm doing a dabbing motion, as you can see here, pulling back a lot of it, but I am really liking the look of age that it's creating. You could probably use glaze or wax for this step, but I really liked the extra texture that the milk paint provided. I felt like it added just a little bit more dimension and a little bit more age. So I'm going to continue to add that milk paint over all of the different sections, just repeating the same process as before, applying that milk paint that's almost like a wash and then pulling some of it back with a wet wipe. If the vintage and worn look isn't for you, you could definitely leave this step out. When I got to the back section, I was definitely making sure that I allowed a lot more of that almond latte milk paint to sit into the details of that casting. And we have this piece in resin, so obviously I wasn't worried about breaking any of this off or being too tough. So just really working that milk paint in there, using a mister to also help it move a little bit, and then using a wet wipe to pull a lot of it back. Once I had applied the wash to the whole project, I did go in with a wet wipe again. Milk paint can be reactivated with water, so I'm able to go in and do a bit of wet distressing over the top of the embossed details. And I also went around the edges. I wanted to lighten those up as well. When that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Simply White Chalk Paint. I'm going to get a little bit on my brush. I'm going to offload some of that and then go over the top of the details. I really like how this is bringing attention to the high points. And again, it's creating more of that layered, textured look. I'm also going to lightly go over the top of the other areas as well. Again, just to give some lighter points so that it's not looking too grungy. If I inspire you to try any of the Paint Couture or Redesign products used in today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate links. You will find them in the description below. When that was dry, I then went in and repositioned the stencil. I'm going to be going over the top of that with Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic. I wanted to highlight that a little bit more, and I'm just going in over the top of the stencil carefully, just going over the top of that to bring in that hint of bronze. If bronze isn't to your taste, you could definitely come in with black at this step, or really any other color. When the stenciling was dry, I went in and started adding some of the bronze to some of the bottom details. I'm not going to paint the whole thing, but I do want to bring attention to the center pieces of that trim piece there and the bottom row. So this is definitely something that you can do to make your castings look a little bit different. You can just highlight certain aspects of it without going overboard with adding the bronze or gold. Once I was finished adding it to the bottom section, I went in and added a little bit more to the top design. I'm mainly focusing on the outside edges, and you'll notice in a little bit that I do go back in and wipe some of it back. Again, I don't want the bronze details to be too overwhelming. And you can see here I'm going in with a wet wipe to pull some of it back to soften it. And I'm also going to be painting just the little oval in the center. Now for most of this I just did one coat, but I did do 2 coats for the oval in the center. I also decided to go in and I'm just going to use the bronze over the top of the edges of the napkin holder there. I just felt like this was a nice subtle touch, gave a little bit of structure, added in a little bit more of that bronze without being too overwhelming. When I finished adding the bronze, I did use some of my White Night Clear Gloss Spray Sealer to seal my piece. And here's a look at our finished napkin holder. I love how this turned out. I think it's hard to imagine where it started and where it's ended up. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my final project today, I'm going to be working on this hardcover book that I thrifted for just $1, and I'm going to begin by using Paint Couture's Simply White chalk paint. I'm going to be painting the cover with 2 coats of this. I am going to be using a decoupage paper, so I wanted to lighten up that cover so that the decoupage paper, its colors would be able to show to their best advantage. So just 2 coats on the outside of the book cover. I dried that off really well, and then I took out Redesign's Chirping Bliss. This is a 3-piece decoupage or fiber paper set. Now, I believe these are only available to certain retailers, but I just fell in love with these colors and these birds, and I knew I had to use them in some sort of a project. So this is actually going to be a piece for my home. And it's a really easy project that you can do. You could use these fiber papers to cover over a journal instead. So many possibilities. So you can see here, I'm just working out how I'm going to be having the paper situated. The flowers will be on the back, our bird will be on the front. And I am going to be using Paint Couture's Decoupage Medium in matte. I'm going to lay down a very generous coat. I'm always a lot more generous with the Decoupage Medium when I'm working with fiber paper because it's a lot thicker. And I'm also going on the spine of the book as well. I'm then going to pull that decoupage paper up and over, and I'm going to begin smoothing it down into that medium. And I'm also using my brush to come in with another coat. So again, I'm using a lot more than I would usually, just to make sure that that's all stuck down really well. I'm obviously going to go over the spine of the book as well to make sure that that's all stuck down really well. I also used my finger a little bit to press it into the sort of little divot there where the book opens. The decoupage medium definitely smoothed out that crease, and then I do use my hairdryer on a high heat setting when I'm working with this to immediately get it starting to dry. So I find that that just really grabs the paper well. I'm then going to flip my book over, and I'm going to repeat the same process of laying down a really generous coat of that decoupage medium for the fiber paper to sit in. Now, Redesign do make a decoupage gel that I've heard works really well with these papers, but I'm using what I have on hand. I haven't had any issues with using the Paint Couture decoupage medium for this one. Just remember to be a lot more generous. So I'm going over the top of the back cover with another coat and also on the spine, and then again speeding up that drying process, making sure it's really well adhered. I'm then coming in and I am trimming off the excess paper from around the outside. I will save this, put it to one side. You just never know when you're going to need just a little strip of that decoupage paper. It could fill in a gap anywhere, so I save everything. I'm just going to continue to trim the excess off, and then I'm going to go in and start making some cuts. I'm going to make some cuts where the front cover meets the spine of the book, and also where the back cover meets the spine of the book. Once I've done that, I'm also going to go in with my scissors and make some diagonal cuts at the corner of each of the front cover and the back cover. I'm using hot glue on the inside. I'm going to lay down a strip of that glue on the bottom first, and I'm going to pull that paper tightly and press it in. I'm going to trim off a little bit of that paper there. I'm going to repeat the same process for the other top section there. Again, I'm always pulling it tight. Even though we have the decoupage medium there, I want to make sure it's nice and secure. And then I'm going to go in and lay a strip of glue along the longer side there, folding in that decoupage paper there and then pressing it into the glue. So it's definitely like covering just any sort of book. And then I'm going to repeat the same process for the back. So I use hot glue because I want that immediate hold, especially with these sort of fiddlier cuts, but you could use the decoupage medium if you didn't want to use the glue. I'm then going in and trimming off the excess from the spine of the book and then gluing those little pieces in place. I then took out my embossing medium by Paint Couture, and I'm going to be using this little stencil here. I've used it a few times. Again, if I can find them, I will link them below. I'm using a palette knife over the top of the word jardin, so I'm leaving out some of the letters just so that it says garden in French up the top. I thought that went well with the bird and the florals. I'm also going to add a bit of embossing medium over the top of these sort of scrolly details that are underneath. I thought that that would be a nice touch. And anywhere that I get the embossing medium that I don't want it, because we have the decoupage medium down, which is very much like a sealer, I'm able to wipe that back with a wet wipe. You just want to make sure you do it before it's completely dry. Down the bottom, I positioned another stencil. I just want the address there, so I'm just going over the top of it just like I did with the top. I did make sure that the top section was dry before doing this so that I didn't accidentally smudge it. I really like using the embossing medium. I like that raised detail. I'm going to be keeping it white, but you could definitely just use paint for this step, and really any sort of stencil or even a transfer or a stamp would work great as well. And here's a look at our finished book. I love how this turned out. This was a simple flip, but I think it's turned out really sweet. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video and that it's given you some ideas on how you can use paint inlays, molds, and decoupage paper to transform thrifted finds. Let me know if you had a favorite project from today. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find a full product list and my affiliate links in the description below. Thanks for watching.